Okay, so now we're going to talk about the next part of the brain and its relation to consciousness, and that is the bilateral prefrontal cortex. And prefrontal cortex is sometimes argued as the seat of the soul, and also the human nature is resting on the integrity of the prefrontal cortex. And as such, many people who believe that consciousness is genuinely only human and no animals or insects do not have a consciousness tend to argue that prefrontal cortex is really important for consciousness, and not only from high level, empathy or thinking, but also any kind of sensation and also arousal. Okay, and here is the case study that tells you quite a compelling story about the relevance or irrelevance of the prefrontal cortex to consciousness. So this is a paper reported by 2001, but a similar report has been abandoned in the history. Okay, so just to explain, the top left of the figure is the again MRI picture of sagittal slice at the center, and showing this black part corresponding to the atrophied brain lesion filled by the cerebral fluid. So there is basically nothing over there. And it's not only one slice of the part, but also across the, from the left to the right, this patient prefrontal cortex is pretty much gone. And that's because, you can see it from the figure on the top right, which is showing the figure, a photo taken in 1937, where the patient's, head is penetrated by this long, spike, basically from left to right. Okay. So as I said, the four lobes of the brain in the week one, I introduced the frontal lobe, parietal, occipital, and temporal lobe. And the cerebellum that we discussed a couple of minutes ago is there. And the frontal cortex is really large in the human. And especially the prefrontal cortex here, in bilateral manner, is damaged in this patient. And as you can see, this is reputed function of the frontal cortexes. And to make it larger, this is basically the prefrontal cortex is responsible for decision making and also impulse control and judgment of difficult things, and also emotion control and social interactions. And these are, in fact, pretty important functions or behaviors that shows up in everyday life for our, conscious life. And indeed, it sounds like it's quite critical to have this component for your consciousness to be normal. However, the relevance for consciousness, either in the level of consciousness or contents of consciousness, has been debated. And as I say here, Bolly and Odegaard had these contrasting views recently, and this is something that we will go into the later lectures. And we are going to examine one simple case here. Okay, and if you are in the psychology department, you might have heard of study on Phineas Gage. And Phineas Gage had similar kind of the lesions. In his case, he has iron, spear coming from the bottom to top. In his case, it extended and went out from the top of the skull. And as a result, he lost the vision on the left eye and also left part of the frontal areas. And you might have heard that he became from a very reliable and also honest person into somebody who are highly, obnoxious, telling a lie all the time, and very, very uncomfortable person afterwards. So this part of the frontal cortex has been claimed to be a seat of the human nature. What about the consciousness? That's the question. So let's look at the report. The title of the paper is this: a long-term effects of a bilateral frontal brain lesion 60 years after injury with an iron bar. So as I said, that when you get the bilateral lesion, usually it cannot be compensated by other areas function. So it can be used as a sort of the evidence for the necessity of a particular areas for a particular function, and in this case, conscious experience. So in this guy got an, at the age of 20 years in 1937, which was the time that picture was taken. He was forced to escape through a window and slid down a pipe that gave away. It was part of the war in Spain, if I remember correctly. And he fell and he was impaled through the head on the spike of an iron gate. Surprisingly, he remained there until the bar was cut. And he was actually conscious, according to this report, and even helped in the rescue of other people, actually. So this is again the picture of this guy taken in 60 years after that incident, 1997. And the spike penetrated the left frontal region and they passed through the both frontal lobes and then injuring the left eyeball and then emerged from the right side. And then it was there until the surgical excision was taken out. And his occupation after recovery consisted mainly of simple manual tasks that were always organized and checked by the others. He required supervision even in everyday activities. He was incapable of planning or remembering his agenda or fulfilling his responsibilities, and he had difficulties managing money. And that part, towards the end, this part is highly consistent with any kind of the prefrontal cortical region patient. They basically become quite unreliable in terms of social interaction. And it says incapable of planning, but this is not to say that he can't make a plan to make, let's say, reaching here or there, or eating apple 2 seconds later or something like that. But more complex type of the planning, such as investing money for this particular property, and then 3 months later we sell it or something like that. Long-term planning is impossible for this type of the patient. And also remembering his agenda. So again, he can remember many things in the short term, but he can be always distracted easily by any events. And so that's also contributing to this loss of capability to execute planning that he made. And then he also, because of this, he also has a difficulty in money, can use other people's money and so on, highly unreliable. And then another part of the report says that also noteworthy were his apathy, lack of drive, and the problems with initiating, continuing, and finishing a task. This is also another property that frontal region patients tend to show. And this is, in fact, sign of, behavior sign of the conscious will. And these people tend to not to have that. Unless he is, in a sense, asked, he doesn't initiate the activity or some kind of, behaviors on his own. That's the apathy, okay? And then restlessness and impatience were also occasionally reported. This is also related to this emotional disturbance. Another notable characteristic was his cheerfulness. He would spend a long time telling the same jokes. And this is something interesting, but relatively commonly reported in the brain lesion patients. I might actually talk about this in a later lecture, but in many cases, especially the right side of brain lesion, tend to make people, in a sense, happier or cheerful. This is kind of puzzling, but if many parts of the brain seems to be dedicated on experiencing or evaluating your own situation in a fair manner, and then you become quite pessimistic in many ways. However, the brain region patients tend to be happy if they can survive after initial injury. Okay. All right. So then bilateral frontal lobe damage. So this is our interpretation. Does not seem to cause lower level of consciousness, like vegetative patients or locked in patients or minimally conscious patient. As I said, even after the penetration, he was quite conscious, and then he helped the rescue. Okay, and this spares most of the sensory consciousness or contents of consciousness, like vision, audition, and touch and smell. All these things seems to be mostly fine. Otherwise, it's very difficult to imagine how it's possible for him to, be cheerful and, tell jokes and so on, which requires at least some level of the sensory processing as well, right? And then, on the other hand, all these high-level functions seems to be altered. So then you might ask, okay, then the frontal is not important for consciousness, and the cerebellum is also not important for consciousness. And when the brainstem, upper brainstem is injured, we can lose all the motor, command except for the blink, but still consciousness is there. So then, where does the consciousness come from? That's the next question in the next video.